Thanks, Jerry. I'm really happy to be here, and actually that was a great transition. I started out wanting to be a dance major in college, and Flashdance was one of my favorite movies, so good way to jump into this segment. I'm really happy to be kicking off this conversation about the future of work. We spend more of our waking hours working than doing any other single activity. And the way that work looks and feels and functions is in the midst of a very dramatic shift. You know, if you look 50 years ago, we showed up at offices because we had to. It was the only place where we could find our 40-pound typewriter sitting on a desk and where our massive metal file cabinet held all of our paperwork. We most frequently were in jobs that lasted 25 or 30 years, where we got this nice pot of gold at the end of a pension and a gold watch. And we couldn't quite yet start companies with just a couple clicks of a mouse. Now, every time that we've gone through a really dramatic change in the way that we work in the past, we've had to rethink what skills we need in order to be able to flourish. So when we became farmers, we had to learn the work of agriculture. When we switched to a more industrialized economy, we had to learn how to manufacture things and work on assembly lines. And so the question then becomes, what are the skills, what are the tools that we need in order to be able to thrive as we work through this massive change in work? I categorize the skills into kind of three major categories. The first is problem solving, the second is technical skills, and the third is well-being skills. I had my first experience with the problem solving skills not as part of my current job with New York Tech Meetup, but a number of years ago, I had this amazing sort of first job after college. And if you were to rewind my life back 7 or 8 years, you wouldn't have found me working amongst tech companies. I was instead standing in an engineering lab surrounded by 30 giggling 11 and 12-year-old girls. I was doing programming and fundraising for the Girl Scouts in Southern California. And we were doing an intensive engineering summer program to expose the girls to all types of engineering. And it was in the middle of summer, and we were about to go out on a hunting expedition. But we weren't going to be hunting for boar or bears or deer. We were going to be hunting for bugs. And not just any type of bug, but bugs of design, flaws in engineering. We were asking the girls to start a list of all of the things that they saw in the world that didn't work very well. Everything from a door handle that was too high to a shoe that rubbed their foot the wrong way. And they would use these lists to come back towards the end of the program and create an invention of their own design that would solve one of these problems. So we're out walking around, and the girls are making lists, and the next morning one of the girls comes back and she says to her mentor, who was a female engineering student, "I noticed something in my mom's minivan. She has no place to put her purse when she's driving. Is that a design flaw?" And her mentor says, "Yes, that is most certainly a design flaw. And it's a feature that was most likely left out by the man who designed the minivan." And the girl kind of lit up and said, "Well, wait, so if someone designed the minivan, that means I could design the minivan, and I could design it better." And to me, that leads to two big lessons about problem solving in the future. The first is that it's essential that the people who are designing and engineering and building the products and services that we use be just as diverse as the people who are going to be using them. And the second lesson is that we have a lot of space where we need to add more engineering and design thinking back into early education, or add it in for the first time if it was never there, and make sure that girls like this girl in the program and boys have this exposure to the idea that all of these products, all of the services that we interact with on a daily basis are designed mostly for human beings to use by other human beings. And yet, they don't always work that well. And yet we haven't solved a lot of the major problems of the world. So we need to spend more time working on skills of human-centered design and problem solving. Now, fast forward a few years, and here I am as part of the New York tech community, surrounded by people who are building things. And what's interesting is that these two lessons keep coming back. There's a tremendous lack of diversity in the tech industry at the moment. And I see people solving problems, but the solutions aren't always very accurate or tied to the biggest problems that we need to solve. And I don't think that it's that people are setting out to design things that aren't helpful. I think a lot of it is that the incentive isn't always there to focus on the toughest, biggest problems. And it's also that we don't really teach people how to assess the needs of a community in building the solutions that they build. I was, a year or so ago, I guess maybe longer than that now, serving as an advisor at a hackathon right after Hurricane Sandy. And a young man came up to me and started asking me about the product that he thought he wanted to build. And he said, so I have this idea for an app. You know, all these people are getting this food donated to them, and it might be sort of foreign food that they don't usually use, and I want to make a recipe app so that they know how to take all these strange canned goods and other things and make something great out of it. And I kind of looked at him and said, so you know these same people are also people who have no electricity, so they have no microwave and no hot plate. They probably have no access to a stove, and they have no refrigerator. And he kind of looked at me and said, okay, I'll build a different product. And he realized in that moment that even though he intended to build something helpful, he was seeing it through his own lens, not through the lens of the people who actually had the problem. So those problem-solving skills are around needing diverse thinking, being able to do needs assessments and understand what people's true needs are, and then build solutions that are human-centered design. Now, when we think about skills in the future, we also tend to think a lot about technology skills, the skills that we need to build all of these apps. And what we're seeing is that there's not just a huge increase in the need for technology skills in the tech startup space, but we did an economic impact study that came out this past spring, and we saw that in the non-tech industry, in New York City in particular, the number of jobs in tech is actually higher than the number of jobs in tech that require technical skills in the tech industry. So employers like New York Times and Bank of America and Citibank are actually employing more technical employees than tech startups are. So the need for technical skills is huge. And the first thing that comes to mind when we start talking about this need is the fact that we have a shortage of developers. And everyone says we need to teach more people how to code. And so we have programs popping up all over the place, teaching kids how to code, teaching adults how to code. But I think we're getting to a really interesting point in this technical skills conversation, which is that we're often conflating the fact that we don't have enough computer scientists with the idea that we don't have enough people who code. And I heard the analogy recently that it's like saying, in order to get more architects, we need to train more carpenters. That they're extremely related skill sets, but they're two very different things. And I think we're at this peak moment where we need to have more conversation around what should we actually be teaching? What do we need? What are companies looking for? Because when you actually talk, in particular to some of the big employers, what they're asking for is people who know how to think, people who have computational literacy, people who have general technological literacy, not necessarily people who know how to code. And so this is just the beginning of the technical skills conversation. And I think that we also have to understand that coding isn't the only technical skill, that we also need people who are designers, who are experts in user interaction and user experience, who know how to manage products, and who in general have a level of technological literacy that allows them to thrive. So the last category for me is this category of well-being skills. As we shift away from having sort of one primary employer that gives us this sense of security and support, we move into this space where there's a lot more responsibility on each of us individually to figure out how we can stay economically stable. And I've started thinking about this as something that I call individual economic resilience. This idea that we could potentially teach people the skills to put together their own portfolio, their own toolkit, as Pam Slim calls it, their body of work, a toolkit of compensatable skills that allow them to move easily from a full-time job to a freelance job, back into a part-time job, and yet not experience massive dips in their economic well-being. The other thing that we're seeing as we transition more to an independent workforce, where we're expecting that 40 to 50% of the workforce will be freelance by 2020, and as technology influences all of us to the point where we're sort of always fighting against technology to stay focused and get things done, we're also being pushed to the point where we need better skills at self-management. So even if you have a boss who's telling you what to do with a big chunk of your time, we still as individuals make all of these little micro decisions about how many times a minute are we going to check our email? Are we going to sleep with our phone beside our pillow? Are we going to take the vacation that's been allocated to us? These are all personal decisions, self-management decisions. And I think in order to thrive in the future, we have to develop a better understanding of how we work as individuals. And companies have to develop a better understanding of how all of the individuals within their company get to that place of well-being. So to recap, we need a group of diverse, technologically literate, skilled at needs assessment, problem solving, and design thinking group of people who are also effective, economically resilient self-managers. And one more thing, I also just want to sort of remind everyone, because I forget this oftentimes, that we're dealing with so many constructs of work, whether it's the 9-to-5 workday, the 40-hour work week, how much we get paid, how our workplaces are structured. We interact with these things all day, every day, and we take them for granted. But the important thing for me to always remind myself is that a human being built those systems. And if a human being built those systems, then that means that we all have the opportunity to build something better and build something new. Thank you very much.